I'm Katie Horvath, and this is Peter Smith, the Green Party candidate for Sarnia Lambton. Peter, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me and be interviewed on camera for Valley Review.
You're welcome.
So something that I read about you in your biography was that you have an academic background in nuclear engineering from your original home in England, and you worked your way up at Bear, the former Polysar, when you eventually settled in Sarnia. So could you tell me a little bit more about your career and your community involvement prior to politics?
Sure. So just going back to the degree first of all, at that point in time, this was kind of around about 1969 that I went to university. There were fears then that we'd actually run out of oil and gas, and nuclear energy seemed to be the best option for the future, which is really why I got into it. Now my opinion has changed over the years when it hasn't been quite what we thought it was going to be, and we've had some pretty nasty accidents around the world. Now I think we need to keep the power plants running for now because they're carbon free, but it's not really the power source of the future, not in the way that we thought it was. So anyway, I after spending a few years in the UK working in nuclear plants, I came to Canada and moved up to northwestern Ontario, where I spent 3 years building a coal-fired power plant in Atikokan, small mining town west of Thunder Bay, and then moved back down south, coming to Sarnia in 1987 and working for what was then Polysar, changed its name over time to it was Nova for a while and then Bayer. And while I was there, I took over operating the utility system there. They had their own power plant and electricity distribution system, and helped manage the joint venture that we had with Dow and with Nova, and then subsequently negotiated a deal to sell that plant to TransAlta and to have TransAlta build a new cogeneration system here. And then finally, sort of having given away my job, I guess, a few years later, I joined TransAlta. And what I did there was in the east of Canada, they had a number of different power plants and served a number of different customers. And what I was doing was working with the customers basically to make certain that we didn't have any outstanding disputes, that we worked through things, negotiating contracts with customers, negotiating contracts with the government, and sort of really ensuring that the plants were economical.
Okay, great. And what about your community involvement prior to politics?
Oh, yeah, community involvement. Well, I'm still involved in a lot of things. So I've been a member of Amnesty International, for instance, for about 30 years now, and have been the sort of leader of the group locally for about 20 of those years. We've written in that time over 1,000 letters on human rights issues. I spent about 12 years on the board of St. Clair Child and Youth Services, Children's Mental Health Agency, and then when I left there I spent another 5 years chairing a Children's Mental Health Advocacy Committee, basically looking for additional funding from the government. Since retiring 6 years ago, I've joined what was originally called Adopt a Scientist. Scientists go into schools and demonstrate electricity and science topics in there. So we go in and we teach about flight or sound or electricity or any of those things, but with some equipment that the teachers don't have access to. So it makes it a much more fun event, and it's a fun event for us as well because we're all kind of science nerds at heart. I'm also on the organising committee for the local science fair, and that's been extremely well received, and over the last few years it's grown enormously. So that's really good to see that happening and see so many people interested in science in the local community. Outside of that, I've served on numerous different committees and groups. I guess a fair number of people in town know me.
Okay, great, thank you. So you've been a member of the Green Party for 20 years.
Yes.
This is your second time being the federal candidate. Why did you decide to run?
In this particular time, I think because I think this is very critical, this election. There are a few issues which have really kind of got to the crisis point. And one of those obviously is the climate crisis, but another one is the overdose crisis that we've got, and the number of young people that we're losing to drugs. And what we have been doing in both of those cases is just not working. We need to do something radically different. We've got some good plans. Green Party's got some well thought out programs in the platform to deal with those issues. And I'd like to be a part of that.
Right. And we'll touch on some of the more details as we move along here. So one of the first issues that comes up on your platform is reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Could you explain what that looks like in the green context?
Yeah, I mean that's a very large issue, really, in so many ways. But if you look at the history between what we call the Native Canadians and the non-Native Canadians, we've done some terrible things in the past, and in really cultural genocide is what you might call it. With the schools and and some of the other things that have been done. And we really need to get back to a working relationship with the Native people, because we both inhabit the same country, and we need to be able to work together, and we need to be able to understand each other a lot better. And I think the Green Party probably takes on a lot of the ideals of the Native population in terms of the stewardship of the land and those kind of issues. So it's kind of a natural fit for us, I think, in some ways. But nevertheless, we do need to fundamentally change that relationship from the way it is at the moment. It's rather toxic the way it's been working.
Mm-hmm. Right. So your platform also talks about elements of a green economy, including things like local food security, livable incomes, affordable housing. I read universal and comprehensive healthcare and education, to name a few. So could you tell me a little bit more about those elements of the green economy and why you think that this proposed economy is both different and better than the world that Canadians know today?
Yeah, so firstly, on the food side of things, I think everybody appreciates if you go to your local farmer's market, the quality of what you get there and the taste in the food that you get there, so much different from what you're going to pick up in the grocery store that's been, it's been traveled around and moved around for a long time. So we really want to encourage that. And also, of course, the less you move the food, the less the emissions associated with it and the fresher it is. And also it tends to reduce the spread of contaminants or pesticides. Mm-hmm. So looking at the overall economy there, the issues that we see as the green economy are the things that are fully sustainable. And for so long we've been running on unsustainable products and services. So things like using oil out of the ground to make certain products, to produce fuel, for instance. It's not sustainable in the long run because ultimately it is a finite, we do have a finite amount of it, but also in the damage that it causes in terms of the emissions. So, what we've got to move towards is a more sustainable and long-lasting economy. And I think that sort of is the link back to the Native issue where they looked 7 generations out. Mm-hmm. And what is going to be the impact over that time, and we're not even looking 1 generation out at the moment. So it's a fundamentally different way of looking at what our actions are and what the impact of those will be, and then picking the solutions from that work best for us.
Right. Okay. So when parties claim they want to provide more services, offer increased affordability in the lives of people at large, we all inevitably wonder how it will be possible, especially with the seemingly never-ending debt. So for the additional services, in particular the affordable housing, adding pharmacare and dental to the universal health care, and implementing tuition-free college and university, how would that work?
So the first thing is to just talk about debt, and some people have this idea that we're going to run up huge debts. That's not the case with the Green Party. We do believe in a balanced economy, but that doesn't mean that in any specific year you have to balance it. You have to recognize that sometimes you need to spend money. If there's a bit of a recession on, for instance, the government may need to spend some more money, but then on other times you can actually be bringing in more money and pay down the debt. And Canada's federal debt isn't really a big problem for us at the moment. It's not out of control. as some of the perhaps provincial debts are. So it's manageable. We can work with that. So the overall plan is to balance this out. Now, you mentioned some of the programs we've got which are fairly extensive and expensive. So, for instance, things like farmer care. Now, overall, that will save us money. But the problem is that it puts a lot of expenditure to the federal government. It takes away expenses from the provincial government, which has been providing healthcare costs. And also as individuals, we all pay into insurance for our medications and things like that, and it will ultimately eliminate that and should reduce the insurance costs. So some of these things actually have a payback. It takes a little while perhaps for everybody to understand that you may be paying more in one way, but you're saving in another. Overall, though, what we're looking to do is not to increase taxes for ordinary Canadians, but to increase taxes for high-value Canadians, those who earn a lot more, and for corporations. So we want to increase the corporate tax rate back to where it was in 2008, back to the same level as it is in the US. We want to put a wealth tax on anybody that has over $20 million. We need to do things about the people that have money stashed away in tax havens. So all of those kind of things, all of those we need to work in there to bring in that extra revenue to deal with that.
Right, okay. So I often hear what I believe to be a misconception about the Green Party and how that would work in Sarnia, Lambton. I've heard a lot of people think that your party just wants to abolish the plants altogether. Mm-hmm. So how are you able to explain why you feel the Green Party is the right choice for Sarnia, Lambton, and Canada as a whole, of course, especially in the context of that petrochemical industry being the main source of jobs?
That question comes up quite a bit, actually. So, to explain what is happening at the moment with global warming, specifically, is that we need to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we burn. And that means a big difference for oil consumption and oil refining. Obviously, those things are going to go away over a period of time. Now, that transition's already started because already, we've got electric cars. They're much cheaper to run than a gasoline-powered car. The price of them is coming down because they're much simpler to build in many respects. So very shortly, they will be cheaper to buy, they'll be cheaper to operate, and you'll be able to see there'll be a significant movement away from oil into renewable energy being used for our vehicles. So that is already happening, but we also need to accelerate that to deal with climate change. So yes, we are going to see an impact around here in refining power. However, we still need things like plastics, and as long as we're producing them responsibly and we're using them for the right purposes, they're extremely useful to us. We can't just get rid of plastics and go back to using metal and glass and those kind of things. So we're going to see a change taking place, I think. The plastics manufacturing, that is going to continue. There are also some very innovative things that we can make out of the bitumen from out west. So we've been looking at things like asphalt, making a high quality asphalt. Carbon fiber, there's a huge potential market for carbon fiber, and that bitumen is a really good source for taking out carbon fiber. So there's opportunities here for new industries. And I think the difference that the Green Party brings to this is we're not trying to hold on to the past. We're recognizing the future, and we're recognizing what it is we need to do to benefit from that future. And when you can move progressively towards something, and you can perhaps bring everybody along so that everybody understands, yes, my job is going to change, but there's retraining and there's new industries that are going to open up to take their place, it becomes a lot less scary. And I think the big difference that we've got is we're not basing any of this on ideology. This is based on science and research. We can see what's happening. Let's plan for the future rather than kind of get dragged into it.
Right. So there are still critics and climate change deniers, or even those who believe that stating we're in a crisis is kind of being alarmist. So are you able to briefly explain the Green Party's view on climate change? And I know you've kind of touched on it already, but a little more detail of how you and your party are proposing we face the issue.
Well, the last year of the IPCC, I mean, they've issued a number of reports over time getting more and more urgent in the messaging they've been giving, and largely we've ignored it. And last year in 2018 they issued a message to the world leaders that basically said that we have to reduce emissions by 45% globally by 2030 and drive down to zero emissions by 2050 if we are to keep the temperature increase to below 1.5 degrees C. Now they've indicated that if we go above that, the consequences start getting worse, and they get incrementally worse the further we get from that. And right at the moment we're aimed for about 4 degrees C of increase, right? So it is a radical change that needs to take place. We're basing our view on this on the scientists. And it's not just one or two, I mean, it's literally thousands of them that contribute to the IPCC reports. The IPCC actually only just takes in all of the research that is done globally and combines all that together and sort of brings it all to one place. So you can really think of this globally as this is what the scientists are telling us. We're past the point at which we're going to stop and argue with everybody on this point, because you can't convince everybody.
Right.
We need action now. We can't wait around until everybody buys in. We have to do something now.
Right. So in the green economy, everyone contributes their fair share to the collective well-being. Your party claims there's a growing gap between rich and poor, and that the burden of taxation is not fairly distributed. So what does the Green government propose for tax reform?
So I think the first thing is our entire tax system hasn't been thoroughly looked at since about 1960. And what's happened is successive governments have come in and they've kind of layered things on top of it, and there's deductions for this, that and the other, and then some of those stay and some of them get taken away, and we've got a very complex system now, and there's only a few people that really understand it in any great detail. So I think the first thing we need to do is this understanding as to how much should we be expecting from perhaps somebody that's earning $30,000 a year, and how does that compare with how much taxation we should be expecting from somebody earning $300,000 a year, right? And I think our view of that is that the rich Canadians should be paying much more, a much larger share of this than the average Canadian or the poor Canadian. At the same time, we need to look at what's the share that should be covered by large corporations. One thing I found just recently was looking up the total tax burden. Canadian taxpayers cover about 48% of the total tax burden, the funds that go to the government. Large corporations pay only 9%. Right? So we're paying 5 times more than the large corporations, despite the fact that they are sitting on huge amounts of money, right? And they've got almost enough money to cover our federal debt. So you've got to look at that and say, well, they should be paying more taxes and we should be paying less. So it's going to be a movement towards lower taxes for lower income earners, higher taxes for high income earners and for corporations.
Okay. Can you comment on the current Liberal government's rollout of the legalization of cannabis?
Yeah, that's been a bit of a mess, I would say, but they've been amply aided in that by the provincial governments. So I mean, I think the Ontario Liberal government originally wanted all this to be covered by the LCBO and tightly controlled. Then with the advent of the Conservatives coming in, they sort of, no, not going to do any of that. We're going to be much more open and have many more outlets for it. So that's been kind of confusing to start with. I just read somewhere that they've already lost $42 million in the rollout period because the cost of the marijuana was actually higher than what they were getting paid for it. So I don't think it's entirely the Liberals here. I think there's some blame to share around all of the politicians involved in this. Not a great result, and it really illustrates the kind of things that governments do not do well.
Fair enough. So if you are elected, how can you ensure fair representation of all Sarnia Lambton residents in Ottawa?
Well, I think that's a difficulty for anybody that gets into Parliament. So, if you look back at the last election, Marilyn Gladue was elected with 38.8% of the vote, which means that over 61% of the people voted for somebody else, right? And this is just the peculiar way that our system works. And really, it's one illustration, I think, of why we need a proportional representation system. So anybody getting elected at the moment goes in really with a minority support. So really trying to, and you've got to also recognize that there's going to be great diversity of opinion. You cannot possibly listen to everybody. You need to make some decisions. So I think it's a bit of a difficult tightrope walk for anybody, in that you need to take into account opinions locally and conditions locally, and they may not always suit what the government's seeking to do nationally. But just to sort of bring that into the deliberations, what I don't like is the fact that some parties put all of the power into the hands of the leadership, and then they whip the vote and force them to vote particular ways. I don't like that, and it's something there where I think the Green Party is different to the other parties, in that the leader cannot do that.
Okay. And in your opinion, what are the most important elements of the Green Party platform that you want Sarnia Lambton residents to understand on voting day?
First, I think, is the fiscal responsibility, and that it is not based on ideology. None of our programs are. We really look towards science and good research in order to formulate those programs. So fiscal responsibility is number one. The fact that we're going to address the climate issue, but do so in a way which will ease the transition from the old economy to the new economy, right? If we don't do that, it's going to be very uncomfortable for some people. It's going to come as a big shock. We need to work with people and make certain that that happens more easily. And I think the third thing I'd say is with relation to the opioid crisis and the overdose crisis. We have totally failed in dealing with that issue as a criminal issue, right? I think it's about 50 years now since somebody invented the term a war on drugs. We've spent billions of dollars, we've put thousands of people into prison, and it's worse now than it was before. We need to treat this as a healthcare issue, not as a criminal issue.
So we're just about done here. I'm still undecided as to who my vote is going to on election day. So why should I vote for you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because quite often people say, I'd vote for you if it weren't for the fact that I think that vote will be lost, it'd be wasted. And going back to what I said about the election last time, effectively 61% of the votes were wasted because they did not result in the candidate of choice. And so a vote for the Green Party is no more wasted than a vote for the Liberals or the NDP or the Conservatives, if that is the party that doesn't get elected ultimately. So I think people need to start thinking about, what is the government I really want? Because so often they're voting for somebody because they don't like the other guy. So they'll vote for the Liberals because they want to keep the Conservatives out, or vote Conservatives because they don't want the Liberals in. And that ultimately will only ever get you kind of second best. If you really vote for the party that you really want, then you might actually get them in the end. So vote for what you really want, not what is kind of second best.
Right. So that's all the questions I have for you. I wanted to thank you again for your time and just offer you the opportunity for any final message that we didn't touch on today for the people of Sarnia Lambton.
I mean, I think you cover pretty much everything off there. The only thing I would say to people is, this has been building a little bit over the 20 years that I've been involved with the Green Party. We started off being an outsider that nobody really thought about. Now people are starting to pay more attention to it. If you take a look at the platform, you'll find that it actually does make good sense. And I can say it makes a lot more sense than some of the other parties. So take a good look at it, and really, if that reflects what you want to see in a government, then vote for us. Thank you.